kids can help organize toys, help clean up at the end of a playtime period. So again, just kind of recognizing how do we foster that sense of feeling capable? So when we're connected and we feel capable, then we know that we matter or that we count.
Welcome to Now What podcast. And today I'm your host, Yogi Patel, and we have Susan Belangee, and she is a amazing Adlerian that I'm privileged to have a conversation with today. Susan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. I'm so grateful that you invited me to be a part of this. It's always fun to get to talk about Adlerian psychology. So I am Dr. Susan Belangee, and I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I live in the Atlanta, Georgia area. I've been a licensed professional counselor most of my career. That has included private practice work, teaching at universities, online as well as in person. Kind of within the last 5 years, the main hat that I've been wearing is as executive director of the North American Society of Adlerian Psychology, or NASAP for short. Recently, within the last, 7-8 months or so, I launched my own business, decided to leave private practice work and launch my own business that's based on an Adlerian lifestyle assessment, which we'll probably, talk about at some point over the course of our conversation. But that's the other piece that I'm kind of involved in and growing, is this new business to do consultation work and training. I have many people who want to know how I use the Basis A in my practice and with various types of clients and settings. And so that's something else that I am in the process of developing also. So I came to Adlerian psychology, kind of as most people do, at least in my experience. Most people, take a master's level program, counseling type program, and then get introduced to Alfred Adler as part of their theories class. So for me, it was pretty much the same. I had started my doctoral program at Georgia State University. There were several Adlerian professors there, and so I quickly became immersed in Adlerian psychology. I was serving as managing editor of the Journal of Individual Psychology pretty much the whole time I was a student at Georgia State. And then once I graduated, it really became, kind of my way of living, and how I based my teaching and, pretty much everything in my life. It really does become a way of just living life for many of us. So that's how I guess I came to know about Adler and Adlerian psychology, since 1998. So now we're going on, 26 years or so that I would say I'm an Adlerian. And so for many people, they're like, well, what does that even mean? And so for me, what it means is I am someone who values belonging and contribution to the community in which I live. And if I can help foster, that same sense of belonging, for others, then that's me doing a good thing in this world. So Adlerians value connection, community, family, friendships, really being a civically minded person, someone who wants to improve themselves while also helping others improve. So it's a very horizontal, we talk about a horizontal striving. And so as we strive to make a living and do good in our families and our communities, we want others to kind of have the same opportunities and take advantage of those opportunities. And then we kind of raise the community all together. So that's to me what Adlerian psychology is all about.
Well, it's a beautiful view of having this community, that what's good for us and bringing the community with us. So we're all striving and thriving together. I can relate to being an Adlerian. It's definitely something I've heard about. I'm very new to Adlerian psychology, just 15 years into learning, and in the past 5 years, even more so. And I uniquely find myself drawn to the contribution that we get to offer and support others and be supported. So as we talk about Adlerian psychology, I appreciate what you said, that not everyone may have heard about Adlerian psychology. So we'll break it down little by little and delve into this whole podcast and just sort of look at different tools from Adlerian psychology theory and how that could work in relationships in various areas. So how does Adlerian principles of holism and wellness contribute to creating a nurturing environment for children, students in schools, or parents at home, or teachers?
Alfred Adler when he was writing, and he was a contemporary of Sigmund Freud. So that goes back to the late 1800s, early 1900s. Adler was born in 1870 and died in 1937, just to give people a context of the era. At the time he was writing and developing his theory, he talked about really 3 tasks of life, right? So when we think about all the things that people can be involved in, Adler broke it down to 3 areas: career, or the work task; the social task, which included friendships; and then the intimate partner task. As he was writing, the term he would use for that is sex or intimacy. And so again, kind of being of the era in which he was writing, he was referring to, marriage, typically, a man and a woman. And, since that time, I think it's important to emphasize that Adlerians have, adapted and taken that into context, that the area in which he was writing may not fit now. And so I think Adlerians today would say that, marriage is, more than just kind of that strict definition. I think these days people would talk about the intimacy task based on, again, kind of that significant relationship of someone who supports you in your life that doesn't necessarily have to involve sexual behaviors. And maybe that's, and people wanted to hear in this podcast, but I think it's important that, as life, as communities, as people, have evolved over time, and there seems to be much more freedom now than there was back when Adler was writing. I think it makes sense that our theory has evolved and adapted alongside these, more cultural adaptations of what does love look like, and, who does it involve. I'm one of the Adlerians that says there's 5 life tasks. And so I hold my hand up because I think it's an easy representation. So when I think about holism and wellness, I'm attending to, for myself or for clients or students or, kind of whomever I would be working with, this idea. And some of it is age-based. So if we think about career, right, I always kind of put that on the thumb because that's important. If we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if we don't have shelter and food, it's kind of hard to do much else in life. So that's why I put that on the thumb. So when you're talking about kids, that's school. Most of the time, school-age children, their task in terms of career is going to be school. For, people beyond the school years, you're talking about a career, a job, that workplace environment. For little kids, their work is play. And that's something else that Adlerians have grown to be known for. So Adlerian play therapy is a whole area of work within the field, and that does have an evidence-based status. So if you want to do Adlerian play therapy with little kids, that's a good way to go. So that's the career task. And then we have the social task. So again, think about friendships and clubs, organizations, things that bring you in touch with other people. And then we have the intimate partner task. Again, as Adler would have called that, the intimacy task, the sex task. And then these 2, I think it kind of is in the eye of the beholder. I usually put self on the ring finger. So for me, that means, how are you doing within yourself? How are you doing in terms of self-care and, productivity and, those things that really kind of speak to you. And then the last finger is the spirituality task. And that doesn't mean organized religion. That could mean just a sense of being connected to something bigger than you. And again, that's kind of where Adler's ideas about belonging and social interest, and his ideal world would be one where everybody and everything in the cosmos is just, finds its way to contribute and belong. So for me, that's holism. So I look at my hand, and then, we can kind of figure out, how are things going at work? How are things going in terms of, the social connection? If I'm single right now, how am I feeling about that? Is there something else I want to do to bring myself perhaps into a more intimate relationship? Or am I okay, with myself as I am? And then again, kind of looking at, self-care aspects, spirituality aspects, things like that, to really give us that comprehensive understanding of self, recognizing others have the same tasks that they're attending to. And so when we adapt it to, little kids or adults or teens or whomever, I think it's just a neat way to have them stop and look at their hand and figure out, how's life going for me?
The hand model works beautifully. It was just a great illustration for me visually. And those who are listening on the audio podcast can definitely visualize the fingers. Can we talk a little bit more about children and play and the life task and the importance of all five and connecting them.
There's a wonderful quote within the Adlerian community that says, children need encouragement like plants need water. And so one of the ways that parents, teachers, older siblings, older children can encourage each other, is through play. And so figuring out, is someone feeling capable? Is someone feeling, or is a little kid feeling left out because maybe they don't get chosen on the ball field? And so when we talk to kids about, how life is going for them, and again, kids aren't going to sit down and have that same kind of conversation like an adult would. And so we have to meet them where they are. And so, that's where play can be a good medium, playing a game of checkers or playing a game of cards or drawing, things that really integrate, more of that type of activity, I think is a good way to help figure out how is this young person doing? And so as you watch them play, are they engaged in it or not? Is it something that they jump right into, or are they a little more hesitant? And that can give you a sense about, do they feel like they're capable? Do they feel like they have something that they can contribute? And if not, then maybe that's, something you can attend to. What would be something, I'll just say Johnny, that you would want to do together, that we could do together, that would feel like play to you? And kind of go with that. But then through that, you can also ask questions about who's your friend? Who do you play with most? Or who do you sit next to at lunch? And again, if you're hearing like, well, I always sit by myself, nobody wants to sit with me. There's ways of using play to then help a young person develop some skills to take into those kinds of environments if something isn't going quite the way that they want to.
What I just received and what I was really more now curious about is there's so many parents out there that, of course, we all genuinely love our children. And sometimes our children need something more or less and we're worried. And you just spoke about play therapy. How does one first look for a play therapist? And also, what would play therapists do in these conversations that's going to help my individual child? Maybe they're overly anxious about separation from me to going to the new school, or for at new school being able to make friends.
Well, let me first start by saying that I am not a registered play therapist.
Thank you for that.
Well, with so much experience and wonderful skill out there. So I would definitely say for anybody watching this or listening to this to check out the League of Extraordinary Adlerian Play Therapists, or LEAPT, LEAPT. That organization was founded by Terry Kottman, and she is the creator of Adlerian play therapy. And so you will find, play therapy classes and people kind of in all across the country. But the easiest way to find a play therapist, that might be a really good starting point. You could also search in Psychology Today for play therapists. And again, they may not necessarily be Adlerian. If you happen to find, a good Adlerian play therapist, then I would say, make sure you bookmark their site and keep them around. So play therapy, its point is to use a method of reaching kids and interacting with kids on their level. Their capacity cognitively is very different than adults. So they're not going to be able to have a conversation. They may not even be able to express, this is how I'm feeling, or this is what's going on. But through play, it opens the door for them to tell you things that they aren't even realizing they're telling you. And that's the really, I think, the beauty of it. When I've used play therapy strategies and techniques and work with clients, what I found was, kids will just start to doodle or start to draw or, kind of play with cards or, kind of laying whatever it is that you're working on, even setting up a board, right, to play a board game. And you ask a question like, tell me a little bit about your class, like who's in your class with you? And then you start to hear about, oh, well, so-and-so is friends with this person, but they don't like me because of, kind of XYZ reason. And they don't even realize that they're giving you really valuable information. And same thing for parents, for parents to sit down and play a board game or play cards or color or doodle or, kind of whatever it is with their kids and be like, well, tell me, what was the best thing about your day? What was the worst thing about your day? Asking who did you sit with at playtime or when it was recess? Who did you go out and play with? And just engaging them as they're doing play activity typically makes it easier for kids to just, share, because then they're not sitting there having to adapt or abide by adult rules. So I think, using play really opens kids up to share in ways that they're not even aware they're doing.
Yeah, and play is such an important part. Sometimes we find that we need to be very busy teaching them ABCs or counting or something of that nature. Otherwise, our job as parents isn't fulfilled. However, I always knew, raising my two children and being a school teacher myself, that when they played and when they lost, when they won, and the rides home without music, or, we would have music for a little bit, but the conversation was we would take turns in sharing. And what was that one thing, like you said, what was that one thing that you just kind of want to say, that didn't really feel so hot? And what was the second thing that you can share that was wow moment of the day? And one that didn't feel so good, what do you want to do about it? Do you want to do anything about it? Are you okay about it? Because the other part of it is we could also get very much involved in fixing. It's easy for children to share, but, and then they are able to kind of identify if something's going on. Often they had such great ideas, these little people, So that's one thing that I wanted to share. And for parents in school too, or teachers, we have so much vigorous curriculum and time that often when children have that playtime, we're constrained by lunch breaks and this and or the other. When children are really observing or walking around in younger age groups, especially in childcare setting or a preschool setting or Montessori setting, whatever that might look like, when they're walking around, they're absorbing so much around them and watching interactions and having those little fights. And I like that they have those little fights, because at least now they know how to negotiate and navigate instead of jumping in and making them say sorry. So thank you for this, especially the part that you shared. And then the self-regulation. So the second thing that popped up for me, especially since we're speaking about children and supporting them and teachers and parents, when you're a teacher, when you're a parent, you go to work, you're doing, and then that self-care piece or the spirituality piece that kind of gets us back. Can you talk about what is Adlerian idea of those two pieces that could really support or encourage parents and teachers?
As you were asking, kind of formulating the question, what popped into my head was children need to be taught, some of these life skills, like how do you manage a difficult situation? How do you manage it when somebody steals your toys and doesn't give them back? Kind of recognizing that emotions are useful and informative, but that's not the whole story. As I think about, again, coming back to the hand idea, so that self-care, self-regulation is the term you used, I think is so important. And play can be a really different way to help kids learn that, right? So when they're not the ones picked, first all the time on the playground, it's having a conversation. Well, what does that feel like to you? And if you get to be the leader and make the choices, how would you do it differently? Or, and kind of have that teachable moment that life isn't always going to be like this, number one, but that they have a way of processing through whatever it was that they felt. So then it doesn't, come out in some negative way somewhere else. So I think teaching self-regulation is so important for kids. And it starts by the parents and teachers modeling it. Again, they're not going to have a clue about, stopping to breathe or, counting in their heads to 6 as they breathe in and then holding their breath and then releasing it for 6 counts. That's not something that's going to automatically come to them. But if we show them and we teach them that, and we do it at home and we do it in the classroom and we do it on the ball field and then kids really start to value hey, I'm in charge of regulating myself. And that's important for me. That's an important task for me that I'm going to have to attend to all my life. For parents coming home from a long day that just want to get dinner done, homework done, and everything else, then maybe it can be the bedtime where everybody just has a collective slow breath, right? Where, before everybody gets tucked in and teeth are brushed or whatever it might be, to have this, nice night routine that's a family time, it's a coming together time. And it doesn't have to be long, it can be 2 minutes of time, something simple, that incorporates other aspects. For people who do have a faith base or a faith practice, teaching children prayer, teaching children, how to have conversations with the significant being that they might involve from a faith-based perspective, I think that's useful too. And for those who don't have any kind of faith background, kind of recognizing that we are not alone in this world. And, if we could make a difference tomorrow for ourselves or somebody else, what might we want to do, right? And so then you just start to introduce these ideas about social interest, which is one of the things that really separated Adler from Freud, was this idea, and the big German word, and the joke was at Georgia State, you couldn't graduate until you could say it. The big German word is Gemeinschaftsgefühl. And my favorite part of this big German word, Gemeinschaftsgefühl, is the Schaffs part, which means shaping. And how we, from a very early age, all the way through until we are no longer breathing, can shape ourselves and the community around us. And so, again, I think attending to the whole hand, right, all the tasks of life, and in particular that self-regulation and the spirituality piece, I think, can really lead us into a more positive, well frame of mind. And again, it can start at a very early age.
In my childhood, it was really important to wake up in the morning and we had a routine. And then we had certain rituals. And one of the things that because I grew up in India before I was 12 years of age, and one of the rituals my parents had at a very young age was contribution to others. And it was that we would make a meal, but the first roti that we made, which is the Indian bread and rice and some vegetables, were put aside. The first set, offering was put aside, and some of it was served to someone that didn't have food, and the others were for the animals that came around. I don't even think they're animals that come to your home anymore, but we had the cows and little goats that would come by. And that, to this day, sticks up for me, the care for myself, but ability to think, wow, someone else might also need it. But if they're happy and I'm happy, we're all it's just to a greater perspective of life. So one of the ideas that it starts very young and it sticks up for me. Thank you, Susan.
Yeah.
So Susan, can you share a little bit more about the concept of family dynamics from the Adlerian perspective?
Sure. So Adler developed his theory kind of based on his own childhood experiences and his own life. So many people have heard of concepts like birth order or inferiority complex or shell shock even. Those are terms that many people don't know, came from Adler, but he was the first one to use them and talk about them. So from a family dynamics perspective, Adler was the second oldest in a Jewish family. And so as some people may know, being firstborn, particularly firstborn son in a Jewish family is a highly prized position. Adler was the second-born son in a Jewish family. And so he was always trying to keep up with this older brother and try to make himself different and unique from the same older brother. So we see birth order ideas kind of come out in Adler's theory, from those experiences. What mattered to Adler was not so much the number you were you firstborn, secondborn, youngest, or whatever. Really what mattered to Adler was what did you make of being in that particular position? And so in Adler's writings, you'll see two different terms. So the first term is ordinal position. And that really is what number are you in the mix? Where do you fall? Are you number 1, number 4, number 3, number 10, wherever it is? And then you see him use the term birth order, and then later psychological birth order. The latter term is really what he was looking at. Again, kind of that unique perspective that each of us brings, along with being the firstborn, secondborn, youngest, whatever it might be. Just to give you an example. So in my family, there were 2 kids, 2 pregnancies. So that's something else that kind of can influence birth order too. If there's a pregnancy that's lost or a miscarriage or, something along that line or a stillbirth, those will influence how somebody parents subsequent children. It's always important to know, were there any other pregnancies or babies that didn't make it? Because that will influence how somebody parents the next child. So in my family, there's just 2 of us. My older brother's 3 years older, and he was the firstborn son, firstborn grandson on either side of the family. So when it comes to having a special place, he had to do nothing to earn his special place. I came along and there's no way I could compete with that. So for me, I'm a youngest. People might say, oh, well, you're a youngest because you're the youngest of two. And in reality, for me, my psychological birth order is not a youngest. I am very much a second-born because I was always trying to compete with my older brother. So even though he was a boy and I was a girl, the way I was raised was to be very strong and independent, to be self-reliant, to not need anybody else. And so in that regard, I look like a second-born. I have many firstborn characteristics, and that's just, the culture in my family. So even though we can have a certain position, right, and say firstborns are always like, or firstborns generally are like, really what we need to be mindful of is that may not be so. So it's always good to ask, what did you make of being the firstborn, the youngest, the only? Because you may hear a very different perspective than what might be generally assumed. So does that make sense
It makes sense. Yes, for me, absolutely, because I have an older sibling, 3 years older, myself, and then my younger sister was born much later. So I saw myself as only at times and the youngest. And, but yeah, there are different ways to look at it. So what you said was really beautiful. And then what was really useful for me is also the psychological aspect of it and how the parents will parent based on the number of pregnancies or what has happened before and after.
So if we think about birth order, that's one component of Adler's, concepts related to family. The other two concepts speak to truly family dynamics and family culture. And this is why I think Adlerian psychology is one of the more ethical approaches out there, because it kind of values whatever family looked like. It doesn't have a scripted version or a scripted understanding about, two parents, two kids, house in the suburbs, kind of an approach. Family can look like whatever family looks like for people these days. So cultural dynamics come into play in what was called family atmosphere. So family atmosphere is the morals, the values, the beliefs, depending on ethnicity and, cultural variables that could, again, kind of look very collectivistic, or it could look a little bit more westernized, where people are a little bit more independent. So really, when you think about family atmosphere, it could be, ranging from, again, as I think about my family, more westernized American, a philosophy. Compare that to somebody who maybe comes from Japan, which is a very much more generationally based kind of an experience in the family. So it's not just nuclear family, as Americans would call it, but really generations of family. And usually families are living among, many other related, individuals within a much broader family. So yeah, so looking at, family atmosphere and figuring out, like, what are those dynamics? What are the beliefs? What are the rituals, the routines, the perhaps faith-based practices that also influence that? The concept of family constellation is more about who is in the family. So that's a little bit more like a family tree idea for people who you may not be familiar with the term or the strategy of a genogram. So in the counseling world, you basically can draw out somebody's family tree. And so that's what Adler was getting at in terms of family constellation, is who is in the family. Because, again, depending on how a family is defined, there may be influencers, that aren't obvious. So to have a sense about, okay, well, who is living in the home, or who is, part of this family, and having somebody define that will give you a better sense about then what are the relationships like among the various people in the family. So again, kind of Adler's ideas are pretty simple, but when you start to really examine the intricacies and interconnectedness of it, you start to realize this is a pretty comprehensive way of getting to know somebody and why they do what they do, or why they think and feel the way that they do.
Yeah, so looking at not just the moment in time and the glimpse of the smaller, and I appreciated what you also said about Adlerian psychology looks at the global perspective. Can you share a little bit about Adlerian practices? And earlier we talked about play therapy a little bit. And is play therapy available outside of U.S., or is it just a U.S. based?
I'm pretty sure that play exists in many different cultures. It probably would look very different depending on resources available and things of that sort. I haven't done a whole lot of research in terms of using play therapy, but based on colleagues, and there are Adlerians kind of all over this world. There's a number in Taiwan and Japan and China. And I know you're heavily involved in the Positive Discipline Association and that whole organization who trains parent educators. So I would assume that, play and recognizing, how children communicate is going to look different from one culture to the next. Probably what underskirts it all is recognizing the value of play, and having children to pretend or having children to draw or, again, play some type of game. I think about, colleagues that are over in Africa and, working in orphanages or things, Sister Rosemary Ara comes to mind, and working in school settings, and how they try to incorporate cooperative games, and things like that to help build belonging and community. We can make family be whatever family is. And again, I think that's just the evolution of our understanding of psychology and how the mind works, and why we think and act and feel the way that we do. And so I think as our understanding of the brain and the mind continues to evolve, our definitions of what is family, what is play, what is wholeness, what is wellness is going to continue to evolve.
And indeed, it's a growth process. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about different concepts that's going to bring that through. So Susan, lifestyle plays a significant role in Adlerian psychology. And could you elaborate on how individuals can navigate the cards that they're dealt with in life and utilize them to foster growth and movement and just find purpose and resilience?
So Adler's concept of lifestyle is very different. Usually when people hear that term, they think like lifestyles of the rich and famous, something like that. And we have to remember that, Adler's ideas, he originally was writing and developing them in German. And so the translation from German to English, sometimes things aren't as clear as we would hope. And another example of that is, and this just popped into my head, when Adler was writing, he was really looking at the individuum. So the Latin term individuum as a holistic thing that you can't divide it up, which again, you got to remember he was writing and developing his theory at the same time as Freud, who was all about, breaking people up into id and ego and superego and kind of having these very distinct aspects of oneself. And Adler was like, no, that's not it at all. We got to look at the whole picture, the whole person. And so that's where the Latin individuum comes into play. That got translated to individual, right? So individual psychology is another term for Adlerian psychology. So our journal, the Journal of Individual Psychology, is still the Adlerian Psychology Journal, but that's where the individual psychology term comes in. So we have some issues with translation. So lifestyle, Adler was talking about like a game plan for living. It's one's unique view of self and others and the world and how we go about moving through our lives, right? So now if I kind of bring us back to the hand idea, our lifestyle, the way that we approach work and friendships and intimacy and self and spirituality is going to have that unique perspective woven through it. So lifestyle, Adler said, was the culmination of early childhood experiences. So everything related to the family influences the development of this perspective. Another term that is synonymous with lifestyle is personality. Some people, the neo-Adlerians, we're not going to call them neo-Freudians, but the neo-Adlerians would say that's ego, that conscious awareness of self and really paying attention to, why, again, kind of why we think and feel and act the way we do gets at lifestyle. I use several metaphors kind of when I talk to people about lifestyle. So you mentioned, the cards that were dealt. One of the assessment tools that I use is the Basis A inventory, and that is an objective lifestyle assessment. So it's uniquely Adlerian. It produces scores on really 9 scales. It's 10 scales total, but 9 scales that kind of have unique understanding. And so as I think about lifestyle and the cards somebody is dealt with or dealt in life, and then you got to figure out how you're going to play them, this can be a good metaphor for lifestyle. So we think about genes and hereditary, aspects of ourselves, that comes into play in these cards. Our families, most of the time we don't get to choose who our families are. We're kind of born into a family structure, a culture, right? And so all of that stuff influences and determines what these cards ultimately look like. And so then we get to play these cards across our life. And the more awareness we have about the cards we hold in our hand, as well as how do we typically use them? How do we typically play them? And does that work for us or not? That's some of the deeper understanding about lifestyle. Another metaphor for it is it's like your thumbprint. You take it with you. You put your stamp on pretty much everything you do in life. And it's only unique to you, right? So we know that nobody has the same thumbprint, fingerprints as anybody else in the world. And so that's another way of understanding lifestyle is each of us has that unique perspective. And even twins, even identical twins, born seconds apart, are still going to have different perspectives on life in some pretty significant areas, simply because one was born first, right? And so then it's, if you think about these two being raised together, it's like, oh, well, yeah, he came out first and she came out second, right? So there's always going to be some early childhood experiences, family stuff, birth order, influences how our lifestyles develop. Adler really talked about psychology of use and movement. So it's not that we have these cards or we have these genetic things or we have this family. It's what do we make of it all? How does that influence the way that we think? How do we then take that and move and try to figure out, again, the world of work, friendships, intimate partnerships, self, and spirituality?
Wow. Fascinating. And I appreciate, I'm hoping by the end of this podcast, I will know which finger to use for which concept and master it. Definitely learning so much from this conversation.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Adler emphasized the purposefulness of behavior. How can understanding this principle help parents and teachers or caregivers help support children and individuals in a personal and professional manner? So what I mean is at home, in schools, how can we support our young ones?
So if we start first with Adler's understanding of purposefulness of behavior, he would say that, again, in just talking about lifestyle, right, each of us has a unique way that we view situations and interactions. That lifestyle starts forming, from infancy, and then we can really start to see it come out and kids start to, test different parts of their lifestyle, different parts of their personality, particularly as they get into the school age years, so that, pre-K, kindergarten, first grade, and so on, up until about fifth grade or so is when Adler would say, lifestyle is forming. So that whole early elementary school time frame, kids are trying to figure themselves out, trying to figure out how is life going to go for me? As they're interacting with new people beyond the family unit, they try out, well, this worked at home to get my needs met. So I wonder if it'll work here in the classroom, or if I wonder if it'll work with, the friends that I'm sitting with at lunch. And not that any of this is conscious in that way for kids. It's that's me as an adult kind of putting words to that thinking in that process. Purposefulness of behavior is, again, kind of getting at the heart of why do we do what we do? When you go to put on shoes and socks, do you do one sock on one foot, one sock on the other, and then a shoe, and then the other shoe? Or do you do sock, shoe, sock, shoe? Different people have different ways of doing it. Until somebody makes them stop and think about it, it might be like, I don't know. Maybe that's my mom did it. Maybe that's just, kind of who knows? So that's really kind of what we're trying to help figure out, right? So parents and teachers and things like that, if you're looking at a kid and trying to figure out why are they doing this, it makes sense to them, but it doesn't make sense to me. And that's another kind of component of purposefulness of behavior is this concept of private logic. Private logic most of the time flies in the face of common sense. And so again, what makes sense to one person may not make any sense to another person. That's why we call it private logic. It's unique to us. So kids are going to try to figure out how to fit in and belong, how to contribute, how to, get noticed and get their needs met, at home, in school, in friendships, and so on. And so if we've noticed and start to get curious. And that's what I've encouraged teachers and parents to do, is to stay curious about why does that behavior make sense to that kid in this situation? It also helps us, kind of sidestep any, frustration, anger, upset emotions that might come about as we watch that behavior. So that's a key thing for parents is to stay curious rather than get overly emotional about whatever that behavior is. Rudolf Dreikurs was a colleague of Alfred Adler, and he really kept Adlerian psychology alive in the U.S. after Adler's death. He was based in Chicago and working with what today we now know as social workers. So he and his wife, T. Dreikurs, were living in Hull House there in Chicago. And so really Adlerian psychology is the undercurrent of social work. He started really writing about and wrote a very famous book called Children the Challenge with Vicky Soltz that talks about how do we help kids really understand why they're doing what they're doing. He developed what we now know as the 4 misguided goals of behavior. You can Google it and you'll see four goals of misbehavior. But I think Dreikurs would take issue with that and say, all behavior serves a purpose. It's not necessarily misbehavior, although we might, as adults, put that label on it. It's just misguided because the kid is just trying to get a need met. And if we can understand what need it is they're trying to meet, then we can help them figure out more useful and more pro-social ways of getting that need met in order. So from the least amount of discouragement to the most. So if we take a kid who wants mom's attention, right? So let's picture this kid's maybe 4, and all of a sudden the phone rings and mom goes to answer the phone. And the kid was hoping that mom would play a game with them. So mom goes to answer the phone. So this kid's feeling a little discouraged because, the time that he thought he was going to have with mom, now mom's on the phone. So mom answers the phone, and this kid, because they're already feeling somewhat discouraged about attention, they might use attention-seeking kinds of behaviors to try to get that need met, right? That need of connection and love that mom was getting ready to show by playing a game. A child who is engaging in the goal of attention is probably going to do something like tugging on mom's pant leg, skirt, arm, leg, something like, trying to get mom's attention. And the way that we as parents or adults can know that it's attention-seeking behavior that's being used in this situation is how we feel. If we're annoyed by this behavior, chances are it's attention-seeking behavior. So let's say that mom doesn't respond because mom's still on the phone. It's an important phone call, and she's doing her best to try to ignore the attention-seeking behavior and hope that the kid gets the message. Well, some kids might just go off and play by themselves. Other kids are not going to stop because they really wanted that sense of belonging, kind of whatever they were hoping would come to them as a result of playing with mom. So now this kid is more discouraged. And so they might then go to a power play. Attention and power, the kind of the first and then the second goals of misguided behavior. So a kid who's using power to try to get their need met might do something like throw a tantrum on the floor, right? So it's no longer, I want your attention. It's, I'm going to demand your attention. And here's how I'm going to demand your attention, right? So now they're pitching a fit on the floor, carrying on, just, being a mess. And the parent then would know, okay, this is now power my kid is using to try to get their need met because I'm angry, right? So whenever we're caught in a power struggle, right? So think about adults. I mean, we as adults use these for misguided ways to try to get needs met too. So when you're stuck in a power struggle, you're usually going to feel angry. That's the power goal. Now, let's say that, mom, in an effort to, again, try to, finish the phone call and not reinforce the power struggle, might say something like, I will be with you as soon as I am done. Something that acknowledges, I see you, I see that you need me, but we're not going to do it this way. So let's say then that, mom's still on the phone and kid gets even more discouraged. And now they go into revenge mode, right? So attention was first, then power. Now we're at revenge. That could look like a kid screaming, I hate you, or you don't love me, or kicking mom in the shin, or doing something to try to hurt mom. And the reason again, kind of the purposefulness of this behavior is that kid is probably feeling, I'm hurt. You've ignored me. You ignored my tantrum. You didn't, help me meet my need. And so now I'm going to hurt you because I'm hurt. Right? Again, a kid can't vocalize that. So it comes out in their behavior. So a parent or a teacher would know, we've now moved to revenge mode because now you feel that hurt. You feel that sense of hurt. So that's the revenge mode. And then let's say, mom's not giving in. Mom's still on the phone, is trying to see this call through. The most discouraged level of behavior that a child might exhibit is what's called withdrawal or a display of inadequacy. Mm-hmm. And so this is a kid who just gives up, who just walks away and gives up. The way that as a parent or an adult that you're dealing with a kid who's given up is you feel that sense of hopeless and you have to do it for them. And so again, this is, from least discouraged to most discouraged, but let's not lose sight of the fact that children have learned in various interactions what works for them. So even the most discouraged child seems hopeless isn't really hopeless. So they're using that misguided behavior to try to get their need met. That was a lot of information.
Yes, and it explains that this is their way of saying, without all the words we use as adults, is I need something. Like you said, I don't have my needs met. Help me to gain that significance. I don't feel belonging right now.
Right? Yes. And that's what it all comes back to. If parents and teachers can do many, many things to foster belonging at home and in the classroom, they're less likely to see the most discouraged behaviors because kids will feel it. The other thing, though, that we forget as adults is, kids are still figuring themselves out at this point. So it may be that you've got kids that just experiment with power and revenge mode behaviors, recognizing how you respond to that can either, help them develop more pro-social, pro-belonging ways of getting their needs met, or it can reinforce bad behavior, quote unquote. Again, recognizing that kids are highly intuitive, and even though they may not understand the why, I'm doing it because, I'm doing this because, we as adults can recognize, there's a reason behind this behavior. There's a reason we're seeing this. Even at that young age, you're going to have more shy kids. You're going to have more outgoing kids. Figuring out, within the family unit as well as in a classroom setting, recognizing each of these kids or each of my kids is going to approach life very differently. I'm not going to have all extroverted kids in my class, or I'm not going to have all extroverted kids in my house. So do I offer ways of belonging and contribution that meet that, right? So a shyer kid may still want to contribute, but they're not going to want to, organize, their peers in something. They might want to organize papers, something they can do on their own. So we got to remember that too, is that, not everybody is going to have the same personality. And so are we offering ways of belonging and contribution that meet a variety of, of potential personalities that are forming?
And what does contribution look like? The way when you shared contribution, maybe they're younger children, and of course there's a dog that is calling for me at this time. So please excuse the dog sounds. But contribution may be where children get to feel useful in some way, where they're maybe involved in independently completing a task, maybe helping with dinners, lunches, just some way where they feel like they're capable.
Exactly right. And that, I may be jumping the gun a little bit, but Betty Lou Bettner and Amy Lou developed kind of as an add-on to Dreiker's 4 misguided goals of behavior, they developed the 4 crucial C's. And so these 4 crucial C's are another way of, and perhaps an antidote to, kids going into the bad behavior categories because they're discouraged. So again, kind of the 4 C's are connection, capable, count, and courage. So we got to start with connection. Are we finding ways for kids to feel a sense of connection? And again, more introverted kids, they're not going to go and join a big group. They're going to keep to themselves. So is there a way to kind of find out who those more introverted, shy kids are and have them come together in a smaller group? And then your loud, extroverted other kids can, kind of be in a bigger group. So that's connection. When we feel connected, when we feel that sense of belonging, then we also feel capable, like we're able to do certain things. Kids love to feel a sense of being capable. So again, this could look like, from a 2-year-old, helping to put the cup, their sippy cup or whatever on the counter when they're done with it. Kind of age-appropriate tasks. Kids are so much more capable of things than we give them credit for. So, kids could be helping with, meal prep, lunch prep, snack prep, cleaning up, sorting laundry. I mean, there's so many things that kids can do from really young ages. The same thing in the classroom, right? So kids can help organize toys, help clean up at the end of a playtime period. So again, just kind of recognizing how do we foster that sense of feeling capable? So when we're connected and we feel capable, then we know that we matter or that we count. So finding ways so kids know that their presence matters is also really important. And so that's where like helping others and kind of recognizing that we can do good things for others, I think helps foster the sense of count or mattering. And then the last one is courage. When we have those first three, then we're going to feel courage. We're going to feel encouraged, and we're going to have courage to face life's difficult times. I think for parents, the first step would be, if you're noticing lots of what you would call bad behavior, stop and think, how am I fostering these 4 crucial C's in the dynamics in my house? And same thing for teachers. If you're seeing a lot of, bad behavior, referrals to the office, what are the ways that you can then come back and be like, do the kids feel connected? Do they feel a sense of being capable? Do they know that they matter, or that they count and have courage?
Yeah. And it sounds like, Susan, the 4 C's could be practiced at school separately and at home. Because often while I worked in schools, we looked at like, hey, if the parents, however, even if we just do these things at school, or if we just do these things to encourage or get the children to that encouraged state, it's good enough. I think that's the first step.
Yeah, for sure.
Susan, from your experience, how can Adlerian principles be applied practically in everyday interactions with children and students and colleagues to promote positive growth and development?
I would say that, we have to know what we bring to the table. Again, as we think about reflecting on childhood experiences, all the concepts that we've already covered, from birth order to lifestyle to purposefulness of behavior to, again, kind of all those family dynamics, life tasks, knowing what we bring to the table can help us, assess how life is going for us. And if life isn't going well, then it offers some insights and some avenues to potentially explore, to get back to a place of growth and wellness and wholeness. For anybody who wants to start applying Adlerian psychology in their everyday life, and again, you don't need a degree to do it, but as you think about some useful ideas. So one thing I hope is that, this hand idea, right? And attending to like each of those fingers and asking yourself, how is this going for me? Or if you're a parent, who's got a kid struggling in school, right? So if school is their work task, because that's just the age-appropriate task, then it's figuring out, well, what do we need to do to get you the help and the support you need so that is going better for you? So it's, knowing to ask questions about how's school going. And then, if you're like my kids, most of the time it's the answer you get is fine. So then it's figuring out what are the other ways to ask about the school day, the school task, because it's more than just sitting in a classroom and learning. We know that school is a, mind, body, spirit task, just like work is for adults. Same thing for kiddos in school. So figuring out ways to ask those questions so you can, as a parent or as a teacher, get a sense of, what's really going on with this kid. Is school going well, or is there some struggle there? Figuring out what are the questions that yield conversation related to each of the other tasks. And that may be something you do around the dinner table or the breakfast table, or again, in that nighttime routine when everybody's, snuggled up on a couch maybe, and everybody gets to share, some highs and some lows from the day, related to, each of those 5 tasks. I think, really looking for paying attention to lifestyle is another practical application. To that end, having somebody just answer real simply, what their unique view of self, others, and the world is. And there's a way to do that where you just kind of take these 3 sentence stems or 4 sentence stems and finish them. So the first one is I am, right? So as you think about, kind of who you are and your sense of yourself, how would you finish that? I am, and then you fill in the blank. Others are, and again, same thing. How would you finish that statement? The third one is the world is, and then the last one is in order to belong, I must, right? So the way that you finish those 4 sentences can offer you a glimpse. It's not a comprehensive lifestyle assessment by any means, but it can offer you a glimpse of like, okay, well, this is how I approach the world. And so, I think that's useful for folks. In my work as a counselor as well as a consultant, one of the things that I use, and I mentioned it earlier, is the Basis A inventory. And so it's a 65 item, questionnaire. It takes 5 to 10 minutes. It doesn't diagnose you with anything. It really just measures, what are those lifestyle traits based on these 10, continuous scales. And then, I use that in a consultative, kind of a process, and it helps people know, again, here's your playing cards, right? As we used that metaphor earlier, these are the different cards and this is how you typically play them, right? So Adlerian psychology is a psychology of use, not possession. So it doesn't matter that you have these traits or that you're introverted or extroverted. What does that look like when you go out into the world? So using, the Basis A inventory as a practical step to getting to know yourself and what you bring to the table and how that influences, again, kind of coming back to the life test. How does it influence work? How does it influence your relationships? That's something that people can do in terms of, putting this stuff to good use. 4 misguided goals of behavior from Dreikers that we touched on too. The attention, power, revenge, display of inadequacy or withdrawal from least discouraged to most discouraged. That's something that is real easy to kind of pay attention to, particularly for adults when you're looking at the behavior and you're noticing, that behavior makes me annoyed, but that behavior, I can really feel the hurt in it, right? So there's the difference between, is this an attention-seeking goal that a child might have, or is it a power or revenge kind of a goal that the child might be using to try to get a need met? Kind of alongside that, I strongly encourage people to, in addition to Children's The Challenge, which is a book you can buy on Amazon, to go and buy Betty Lou Bettner and Amy Lou's book, Raising Kids Who Can, where they talk about these 4 crucial C's, right? So when we feel connected, when we feel capable, when we know that we count, then we have courage and we can meet, the demands of life, with that sense of belonging and wellness. So paying attention to, how am I fostering as a parent or as a teacher ways for kids to feel connected and capable and to know that they count. Same thing at home. Parents can certainly look and see, am I fighting more with my kid or am I getting along with my kid? And what are the things when we seem to be getting along that are going well? And in contrast, when we seem to be arguing a lot or there's a lot of disagreement or, again, quote unquote, misbehavior, what's happening? What's the context in which that behavior is going on? So kind of having the sense of, I can use how I'm feeling as I observe this behavior as a clue, right? So if I'm annoyed, it's attention. If I'm angry, it's power. If I'm feeling hurt, it's revenge. And if I feel like I just need to step in and do it for my kid, that's that display of inadequacy. So there's so many fun and informative aspects of Adlerian psychology that are just so user-friendly, and you don't need to have a degree to understand them. Probably my favorite all-time book is one that Adler wrote himself. And again, you can find it on Amazon. It's called Understanding Human Nature. And Adler, even though he was a doctor, he was trained as a physician, and was, working in essence as a psychologist back at the turn of the century. He purposely wrote books to help the general public. This notion of vicarious learning is also unique to Adler and started with Adler. He would go and do open forum demonstrations where he'd invite somebody from the audience up and ask them a couple questions about, how can I be of help to you today? And in front of an audience, gather this person's lifestyle information and then help them to have a deeper understanding of themselves and why they were struggling, and then steps that they could take to help fix it. Adler was all about, let's get the information out there. Let's share it because it can be helpful to many, many people. So Understanding Human Nature is the layman's guide to his theory. I think it's real easy to read and understand.
Thank you for all the lovely resources, the different concepts that we can use. It's been just an amazing, encouraging conversation, and emojis that pop up like life.
I love it. I love it. I love it
too. This conversation's been really, really inspiring and helpful. And I know that it will help many parents, children, in turn, teachers and students. I'm grateful to have you on this podcast today. And if listeners, you like what you're hearing so far, don't forget to follow. And please add comments for conversations you'd really like to listen more about, and would be happy to share those in the future podcast. Thank you for paying attention to what we had to share, and looking forward to hearing and seeing you again. Susan, thank you.
Thank you.
If you like the content of this video, please don't forget to follow. And also, if you want more information, visit the website yogipateltte.com.